President Biden has abandoned. And there are some very simple reasons why we're having to do this.
A new report reveals that Venezuelans have become the largest nationality for illegal border crossings, replacing Mexicans.
This week, thousands of asylum seekers from Venezuela will be granted temporary protected status.
He's never called me to talk to me about the immigration issue.
The president is granting temporary legal status to nearly 500,000 Venezuelan migrants who are already in this country.
Migrant crisis escalates. Anthony Reyes, a 23-year-old Venezuelan, was among the thousands of migrants who rushed to cross the U.S.-Mexico border after the Biden administration lifted the pandemic policy known as Title 42. The largest group were Venezuelans who have been arriving in the United States in record numbers since 2021. Many of these newcomers lack networks in the United States and have headed straight to New York, whose shelter system guarantees a bed to anyone regardless of immigration status. New York has spent $1.2 billion on the relief effort since last summer, with Mayor Eric Adams feuding with local leaders upstate over who should take responsibility for the migrants and calling out President Biden for not sending more aid. Other U.S. cities are struggling with the influx, with Denver, Philadelphia, and Washington receiving migrants bussed from Texas as part of a campaign by Republican Governor Greg Abbott to denounce Biden administration border policies.
President Biden has abandoned. And there are some very simple reasons why we're having to do this. I fully expect the Biden administration to stop playing word games and stop and do their job. But providing more resources for the federal government to do its job. Joe Biden is responsible for the largest amount of illegal immigration in the history. He's never called me to talk to me about the immigration issue.
In Chicago, migrants have slept in police stations while awaiting shelter beds. The flow of Venezuelans crossing the southern border has dropped since the Title 42 policy ended, as many continue arriving in northern Mexico in hopes of reaching the United States. The Biden administration is tightening border controls and urging Venezuelans and others to apply for legal U.S. entry using a mobile app, while expanding the number of slots available for asylum seekers to make an appointment at an official border crossing. The influx of migrants in New York has pushed the city's total shelter population to 95,000, up from 45,000 when Adams took office in January 2022. At roughly $380 per person daily, the cost of caring for the migrants will reach $4.3 billion over the next 12 months. Mayor Adams thanked Representative Hakeem Jeffries and Senator Charles E. Schumer for helping to secure $104 million in federal funding for the city, while also calling for more resources. Challenges and integration. The ongoing migrant crisis in New York City, exacerbated by policy changes and the influx of Venezuelans, has placed significant strain on the city's resources and infrastructure. Despite legal constraints on gathering data regarding the nationality or citizenship of shelter occupants, officials informally acknowledge that the majority of migrants arriving at emergency sites are from Venezuela. This influx of newcomers, lacking established support networks, intensifies their reliance on public services and assistance, particularly in a city where the housing market presents significant challenges. The Roosevelt Hotel, previously closed during the pandemic, has been repurposed as a shelter and reception center for migrants. Here, buses of migrants receive essential services such as meals, healthcare access, ID card assistance, and support enrolling children in schools. Manuel Castro, New York City's Commissioner for Immigrant Affairs, highlights the disruption caused by campaigns led by Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, which redirect migrants to northern cities. This diversion from traditional settlement patterns leaves many Venezuelans without existing ties to New York, leading them to rely heavily on city resources for support. Non-profit and faith-based organizations, in response to shelter bed shortages in cities like Denver and Houston, facilitate transportation for migrants to New York, where they are guaranteed shelter.
A new report reveals that Venezuelans have become the largest nationality for illegal border crossings, replacing Mexicans.
Leaders here in El Paso are veterans when it comes to providing food and shelter to those who have newly arrived.
The president is granting temporary legal status to nearly 500,000 Venezuelan migrants who are already in this country.
Venezuelans were arrested nearly 55,000 times last month.
Now, this could be life-changing for those families looking to work and make money here legally.
However, the city's status as an immigrant gateway is marred by the lack of affordable housing, with average monthly rents exceeding $4,000 for one-bedroom apartments. Despite the availability of formal and informal employment opportunities and robust public transit, the housing affordability crisis remains a significant barrier to transitioning migrants out of emergency shelters. Oralis Narvarte, a 34-year-old Venezuelan migrant residing in a shelter on the Upper West Side, reflects on the challenges of high living costs despite securing employment. The need for shelter persists due to the prohibitively expensive housing market. Narvarte's situation highlights the ongoing struggle faced by migrants navigating New York's housing crisis while attempting to establish stable lives in the city. Married couples and families with children receive priority for hotel accommodations through the shelter system, while single adults typically occupy dormitory-style accommodations. Diosvani Molina and Audrey Monsalve, a couple facing the prospect of separation due to room allocation policies, contemplate marriage to remain together. Their desire to reunite their respective families underscores the complex familial dynamics and aspirations driving many migrants to seek refuge in New York. An influx of Venezuelans. Over 7 million people have left Venezuela over the last 10 years due to the country's economic collapse and dictatorial government, making it the second largest external displacement crisis in the world behind war-torn Syria, according to the UN. Before traveling north, a large number of Venezuelans arriving in New York had lived for years in other South American nations. They said that the jungle walk across the Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama was not as terrifying as it was in Mexico, where they had to constantly worry about being threatened by criminal gangs and facing shakedowns by the government. The large number of Venezuelans departing from other nations may make it more difficult for them to obtain asylum in the United States, which grants legal status to people who have been persecuted because of their ethnicity, religion, political opinions, or social group membership.
This week, thousands of asylum seekers from Venezuela will be granted temporary protected status.
They feel their quest for the American dream involves a disproportionate number of twists and turns.
Migrants will receive protection from deportation and be eligible to receive work permits without having to wait.
But once again, some of those organizers are telling me they are being pushed to the brink.
According to Jesus Aguais, whose organization Aid for Life International provides a free legal clinic for immigrants on the Lower East Sides, Venezuelans traveling to New York urgently require American protection as they are escaping political prosecution, paramilitary groups, and widespread corruption. Aguais, an AIDS activist who moved to New York from Venezuela in the 1980s, claimed that for them, persecution became normalized. He stated many are still afraid to apply for asylum here for fear that the Venezuelan regime will learn about it. Reyes was raised in the formerly affluent city of Venezuela's oil belt, Maracaibo. 10 years ago, his parents, who were both born in Colombia, returned there with their family. The job chance had passed by the time Reyes met a buddy and discovered a juice bar on Broadway. After failing to find employment, the men turned back toward the Roosevelt Hotel, calling it at every building site they passed. Migrant relocation. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been implementing a controversial strategy to accelerate relocations by moving migrants to hotels in other parts of New York State, while urging the federal government to fast-track the work authorization process. The city will pay for their rooms and meals for 4 months, but Republican leaders of many countries have reacted furiously as they are already grappling with a housing shortage and are not willing to help with what they describe as a problem created by policies embraced by liberal lawmakers.
Venezuelan migrants do we have in this, in our shelters right now?
Overall, there was an uptick in illegal border crossings from all nationalities.
We need all of the immigrants, migrants who have come here to be eligible for TPS status.
They are just as deserving as migrants who came before them.
While most New York countries rejected the notion of taking in migrants, at least 2 countries led by Democrats said they would welcome them. That included Westchester County, just north of New York City. County Executive George Latimer said the decision was partly a moral obligation to help people in need. People not unlike his own immigrant ancestors from Italy and Ireland who sought an escape from poverty and oppression. Castro, the Immigrant Affairs Commissioner, said he hopes the Biden administration will extend a form of provisional legal residency known as temporary protected status to the Venezuelans so they won't end up in the overburdened U.S. asylum system. The protected status is only available to Venezuelans who arrive before March 2021, but the Department of Homeland Security has the authority to extend eligibility to newer arrivals. Andres Solbaran, a 31-year-old Venezuelan staying at a city shelter in Queens, recently attended a Guay's free clinic seeking advice on his asylum claim. He said he left his home country to Ecuador 2 years ago to earn money to support his mother, but he faced xenophobia amidst a backlash against Venezuelans. He crossed into the United States from Mexico on May 8 through a hole in the border fence, suffering cuts from concertina wire to his arms and leg that needed stitches. He spent 15 days sleeping on the floor on a border patrol station with 400 men in his cell with a posted capacity for 122. With no family in the United States, Solbaran rode buses to Houston, then New York. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.